Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are on this fast forward planet, this human heated planet, this turbulent planet, misinformed planet, wrapped in a pandemic still. I try to keep track of the data on that. And, there's still such a long way to go. One of the latest encouraging data points was Brazil, after such a horrible time, has something like a more than 80% vaccination rate now, which is, I think, might be higher. It's higher than the United States, significantly higher. So it shows you what can happen. But today's conversation will start with what hasn't happened. A group of students here at Columbia and at Cooper Union found themselves through various connections, shared their anxieties and frustrations, and yes, even some anger. My generation, the baby boomers, we've left a mess here, and it's still emerging. The impacts not just on climate, but on oceans and the biosphere and society from the extractive norms that we've had through the time I grew up in are coming to roost in a way that people who are just starting their careers and their scholarship have to deal with. I'm Andy Revkin at the Columbia Climate School. And I run a blog called at revkin.bulletin.com. And I am an old timer on this climate question, but this is the time for the new timers. And you're going to hear from Mia Winther-Tamaki, Sofia Assab, and Devon Tietjen going forward through the hour. And they'll stress this is the beginning of a conversation with you, wherever you are, not an insular thing. But I'm going to leave it at that. This is what we call a friendly takeover of this platform, where I do like a Harry Potter thing and just disaggregate. And you'll hear for the next hour from these wonderful guest hosts. So thank you all for being here today. I hope you're all doing well. And Sophia, I think you're going to take the reins.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with just talking about how we came to this point that we're all sitting here today. Because it's very different than what I think Devon and I initially imagined. By Andy, off to Harry Potter world. So Devon and I met and started just talking about kind of world affairs and the future. And he and I came together and made an outline for a book about something completely different. It was about capitalism and the future. And we introduced that idea to Andy and said we would love to do a takeover talking about this. And we had this really long kind of academic outline, and we went back and forth and Andy said, maybe it's a little too much. We need to hear more about you. And then Mia came into the picture, and Mia is amazing. She's from Santa Barbara, UCSB, studying environmental studies, but now she's in a master's program at Columbia doing urban planning. And we just started talking to her about our ideas and ended up having these amazing discussions about how we all feel in this space of sustainability and sustainable development and thinking about our future. And it turned into this really cathartic conversation. And Devon and I were like, why don't we just talk about this together? Because it felt so good to bring in someone else who had a slightly different perspective than us, but was also experiencing the same sort of fear and frustration. And we just learned that talking about it made it easier and kind of made us more hopeful. And that's why we wanted to come here today and bring this to all of you. And this is going to be a continued conversation. And we would, if any of you are interested in joining us, we will offer ways to do that at the end of our talk. And I can't forget about introducing Devon, who is an undergrad at the architecture school at Cooper Union, and has a focus on sustainability, but is mainly studying architecture. And I think we just want to go into what keeps us up at night. So Mia, if you want to just tell us one of the things that keeps you up at night.
Thanks, Sophia. I think the way I've been feeling is the way a lot of people have been feeling, especially that are in our demographic. So like Sofia said, I do come from an environmental studies, sustainability-oriented background, and I found myself being really depressed about all of this. I learned about flood after flood and earthquakes and all these disasters happening, and this was years ago, and that kind of despair kind of culminating into how I feel now and how I felt more recently moving to New York and kind of going into this, trying to pursue a career in the built environment and really thinking about the role that we play with our built environment and really witnessing these absolute disasters and floods and just also learning about the impact we can actually make and how a lot of modern environmentalism is quite useless, arguably, but so just kind of finding myself in this area of despair and anxiety and anger about my positionality in the world, because I felt like I didn't, of course, like we inherited this state of the planet and that wasn't my fault, but it's that's just how it is. And I found myself having these really meaningful discussions with people all around me, whether that be my friends, on a Friday night, just trying to have fun, a Friday night, just trying to have a great night. And then we're huddled around talking about the despair that's been on our mind, and we haven't really, actively talked about yet. It's just kind of been in the background. And then also on like Instagram stories, people will start just like commenting on things, and I'll find myself in these discussions. And so all around me, I did find myself talking about these things. And so this slide here, let's see. So this is a bunch of screenshots from TikTok and YouTube, and it also continues into like Twitter and everywhere else. But I realized that this youth generation that we're in, we're all thinking about these things. We're thinking about why is it that we're working like 40 hours a week and not being fulfilled, and why is it just this is the status quo? There's many other realities that exist that don't have to align with this. So I think it's just kind of this maybe millennial or Gen Z generation coming together and saying, this is a capitalist system of labor that we have inherited, and it can be up to us to rewrite this social contract if we want to, and in a way that meaningfully improves our lives and the lives of future generations, and of course, the state of the planet. And I do want to just note really quickly that we are absolutely in a state of privilege to even be thinking about these things. A lot of people don't have the resources or the time and to think about this. And also, we're students at a really great university. And so I'm not, working 9-to-5 service jobs like a lot of people are. So the people who are really feeling or really experiencing this is not even us, So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and we'll continue into that more. But that is kind of where I come from, just kind of an absolute state of despair. And I think it's really important to learn how to reframe this, because depression and anxiety really won't get us anywhere. It is a great place for us to meaningfully identify where we're all feeling and the similarities of this experience, of this lived experience. But yeah, how can we meaningfully talk about this and reframe this story and narrative and make a more productive way to talk about these things?
Yeah, I think that brings up something that I wanted to say before, but I forgot. I think it's just really important that we, before really getting into this conversation, address like how privileged we are to be able to even talk about this. We are coming from a place of immense privilege. We're all being educated. We're able to be educated. We're able to take time to read books and learn and just like have discourse and access all these things. And we're all based in the United States, where everything is at the tips of our fingers, food, water. So I think that's another thing that we will definitely bring up in more detail in future conversations, but also like the privilege around the conversation of sustainability, which doesn't necessarily have to be there, because this is an equalizing issue. We are all on this planet that I think is dying, and we all are going to be immensely affected by that. So it's both a position of privilege to be able to talk about it, but it's also it also affects every single person on this planet. And that kind of brings me into what I've been thinking about a lot lately in this conversation, which is how moments in my life where I've kind of been tuned in, where people around me haven't, and because I have decided to pursue this as a career path, and I do all the reading, and it's constantly on my mind. And I ended up taking a gap year after high school, after a really influential class there called Global Futures, Global Warming, which is really the catalyst for me thinking about all these things and sustainability. But during that gap year, I was reading a lot of books and traveling to communities that I hadn't been to before in Southeast Asia, and just kind of living off the land and seeing where trash was going. I remember being on the island of Gili Mino, living with this little family, and they are on an island, so they don't have places to put their trash, so they burn it, and you see burning trash everywhere, and you're right next to the ocean, and it's right in your face. And because it was in my face, and I was reading these books about zero waste living, I was like, I need to do this. I can't do this anymore. And again, definitely a future conversation about like the privilege of being able to do that. But I came back after my travels of going to the market and making sure nothing had plastic and reusing little jars, and came back to my parents' house, and I just remember no one was there. Neither of my parents were there when I arrived back home, and I went into my kitchen and I just see plastic everywhere, and I realized, oh my God, I've grown up here and I've never thought about the action of throwing all this stuff away at the end of its use, and it being surrounding me throughout my whole life, because it was just a norm. And I think this is so like, and I also remember going shopping with a friend who wanted to buy grapes for a picnic later that day, and I was like, how could you buy that? They're packaged in plastic. And 1 year ago, I would easily grab that. And to this day, I shifted out of zero waste living, which is so easy to do. And now I will go grab a bag of plastic grapes, even though I, at one point in my life, saw things clearly. And I just think that's another thing that gives me hope, is that someone who has been able to throw things away and able to, again, like my consciousness did shift at one point, and I think conversation about that can help us all shift into thinking more consciously about what we're doing. And I don't, Devon, if you want to jump in and tell us about.
Yeah, no, for me it's interesting because I grew up in New York, which is like the epicenter of a 20th century city, nicknamed the urban jungle, because of the concrete everywhere. I mean, it's all these new conventions that came as a result of modern architecture and all these new building techniques that caused this system that is so atypical for the natural world, for what many people would call nature. And for me, that was my nature, because it was what I grew up in. It was what I was used to. I was around it 95% of my time. So for me, like, nature was Central Park. Nature was a concrete playground. It was a very interesting way for me to grow up, to the point where when I heard these conversations around environmentalism and our environmental impact, I never really thought of the actual systems and structures that existed, but more like recycling and all that stuff, which was when I was much younger, of course, like I would say grade school, middle school. And it didn't really seem to be that big of a problem until I really started going on the internet. When I got a smartphone, when I kind of had my own autonomy of information. And I began realizing, after like reading all these articles, like how, I guess, possibly horrible our future can be. and how we caused it. And because of my, I guess, ignorance to how fake cities really are, I began doing more research into it at a young age. And I was always interested in architecture, urban planning, civil engineering. So I had an idea of how systems were constructed, but I didn't really understand why. Like, why deeply? I always understood skyscrapers are tall because we need to inhabit like these very dense areas, but I didn't really get why are areas dense in the first place. Why do we have these kinds of societies that are structured in this way? So when Sophia mentions plastic, it's like, well, why do we have so much plastic in the first place? Why does the car exist? And you realize that there's all of these actions that are both political and systemic by the corporations that made these products that make them so insidious. And that's because it's about revenue, it's about money, it's about consumption, and it's not actually about like the public good. So when you start shifting into a conversation now with a lot of people in our generation, like the talk we're having, it becomes this totally different paradigm where we're trying to think of what's best for people and not what's necessarily financially best. But because of the systems we have in place, we tend to entwine the two, right? And this is more just a way for us to have an open conversation as people who have the privilege to not have to worry about our financial status at the moment, like how we're going to make our money. We're all in school. So our lifestyles are somewhat subsidized either by our parents or the work that we do while we're in school. So we're able to kind of forget about the capitalist system and have these conversations and say, okay, like, what do we want our future to be? And what systems do we want to exist? How do we want them to look? How should they operate? For what benefit? For what own? Like, it's pretty much as simple as like, what do we want if nothing mattered and we just existed? Like purely existence. Like we want food, we want water, we want a home. Like what are the basic necessities of life? And in a lot of the developed world, people have some of them, but not all of them. Like there are countries where a home is a human right, where in the US it's not. But in the US, water is a right, but it's not in other countries. So it's really interesting when you really start looking at that architecture and we think about technological solutions. I'm pro technological solutions, but there's still so many basic things that we have not yet agreed upon are like required for existence or even acknowledged as being such an important factor to both our sustainability, our happiness, our shared communal experience, and our relationship with nature. So as someone who's studying architecture now, and architecture is a huge carbon footprint, a big thing that we're talking about in sustainability and environmentalism is exactly that, the footprint of architecture and how it comes to be. But the problem is exactly like, oh, what are architectural solutions to these problems? Like, what are buildings that you can make that create a conversation, right? Instead of being like, well, why are these buildings here in the first place? Why do I need to make a whole display that is going to cost several $1 million, pour more concrete, move more steel, have more people working on this, emit more, just to then say, oh, pollution is bad. So it's kind of like the reframing of these questions, not just saying like, oh, we shouldn't build more things, but really like taking a deep think about why this is important, what's provocative, and what's necessary.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just really quick that really builds into this point of like why is it that we're taught to think that we need more steel, more building, more this, and same for urban planning. It's like we need more skyscrapers, like more roads, more highways. Let's build more roads to make the traffic problem better. But we all know that, I mean, that actually just brings more cars at the end of the day. And I think that is something that we have internalized as Gen Z, millennial. We've been kind of forced to grow up and enter this labor market under this type of dynamic and internalizing this drive that we need to be as efficient as possible and be as productive as possible and produce as much and have as much output as possible, because in our society, that is a unit of success. And so that has enormous costs on the environment and also our happiness. Like Devon was saying, it's we're training ourselves to take on those costs, and sometimes we don't even realize the toll that it takes on us. Obviously, there's things like student debt and student acceptance rates for college, how that there's a huge anxiety around that, as if that is your rite of passage into successful rest of your life. But so that tie is really interesting, how not only is it growth from this capitalist perspective in a very physical way and like economic way, GDP, that's how we measure success in our society, but also how that manifests within our minds. It's like, be productive, be efficient. Yeah. And so that's also what I was talking about, the TikToks and Twitter posts and tweets, how people have just been saying, you know what, I'm going to take the day off, because that's what normal people do, and that needs to be normalized. And we need to start enjoying our lives and being present in the moment. And this even can tie into like a more spiritual lens. Like we're always so anxious and thinking about work and more that we're so unhappy, and we have more things, too many things that we can't even keep track of. So it's really like learning that lesson from our physical environment and bringing that into how that manifests within us and affects our daily lives.
Yeah, no, this is so interesting, because right now I'm beginning my thesis, which is basically on how our value systems impact our willingness to be sustainable, which, Mia, is exactly what you're saying. Like, we've grown up in a world where I'm actually reading a book. It's called The Frugal Art of Hedonism. It's really interesting. And one of the points that was just made in my reading was we're born in this world creative and wanting to learn for the sake of learning. And I'm sure hopefully we can all tap into our child minds and remember what it felt like to just imagine all day. And then we are put into a system that measures our success. We are measured by grades. We're measured by getting into a certain college. And then, or if we take or we're measured by how much money we make at work. And this is just making me think of something that happened recently at Columbia. I'm working for a capstone project, and one of the things we're doing is helping the Columbia Dining check their sustainability and the concession stands around Columbia to be more sustainable. And one of the things that was said in our first meeting was, this is a business, so we are making money. Like, Columbia Dining is a self-funded program, and we need to make money. So we, for example, can't cut out all red meat because students won't like that. And this is a consumerist driven system. And they were kind of saying like that it needs to be a bottom up. And I think as young people, we are so sick of hearing people say like, it has to be from the bottom up. Like, we have to start, it's on you to recycle. It's on you to not choose the plastic bottle, instead of our systems protecting us from those things. And also that brings in the privilege again. Like, it's a privilege to know exactly why we shouldn't be picking up a plastic bottle, and it's a privilege to know that recycling doesn't work. And we've just been, I think we're all so frustrated that we are being told it's on us. Everything seems to be on us. And I think having these discussions can help us figure out how do we lift that weight and give it back to the fossil fuel industries, to everyone who's making that a reality.
Yeah, it's an insidious system that was kind of started before we were even born, that is based around the fact that companies can just pass the buck to people. And we grow up in this society that just has these conventions, and we're just grown up to say like, oh, this is normal. Like, for example, if you live in a city, 80% of public space is for the car. And that's just something that is normalized now. Parking spaces are a huge burden on both transportation, how you can get around a city, pollution, noise, just the amount of cars we have in cities. And even a comment that I saw that was on the circular economy. The circular economy, like in some frames, is really beneficial when it comes to creating products that can be recycled, that don't just go into a landfill, that can get reused. But then also, why are we even making so many products in the first place? Like, why is it that we have this need to produce a new thing every year that people are going to buy and then throw out the old one? And even if there is a circular economy of some parts, where, for example, maybe we're talking about iPhones, the cameras get recycled, or the computer chips get recycled, or they take the precious metals and then they melt it into a new phone, that's still a lot of waste and a lot of energy that is going into creating that circular economy, because they know they're still getting a lot more value out of creating new unnecessary products on an annual basis, where rather it would be so much better if instead of having a brand new product, only the things that actually changed were the things that got upgraded. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about, which, yes, might not be the most capitalistic approach. It might not be the best thing for GDP, but it also is a better thing for the planet, and also a better thing for our mental health as well, where it becomes this easier task to have the things we like and then continue with them, rather than think that, oh, there's this constant change, there's these new things, and then there's judgment that goes with it. So overall, like socially and environmentally, there's an entwining between everything. And it's really like the choices we make, the places we live, and how we really want to deal with it.
No, yeah, I think we also need to talk about, Mia, if you want to share the next slide, because Andy sent us a really interesting study that just came out, and yeah, here we go. And if you guys can see here, like, it's not, of course, it's not just the three of us who feel this way. I think that's pretty obvious with the climate marches that we see. I remember all the way back in 2014, I think I was a sophomore in high school. My school did a strike. We left school for the climate. This has been going on for a long time, and I think it really is the voices of young children, especially kids who are growing up in these changes, who are feeling it in their bones. I was old enough to see snow to my shoulders as a little kid in Massachusetts, and that doesn't really happen anymore. Like things, but I had some consistency growing up, and now we do have a generation of kids who have no consistency. They are seeing the news for disruptive hurricanes all the time. Their weather is changing. Every single year is the hottest one. And the fact that that is a norm, and that children are being forced to worry about their future, not just because of factors that are coming in from within, like from their own personal situations, which is another whole issue, but no matter what, we have to worry. Mia, I don't know if you want to talk about this a little more.
Just kind of building off of that, I think, this is not to say that the older generations before us are completely in control of everything and we are the victims of everything. I think that it is fundamentally a capitalist story, and this is obviously a system that we've inherited, but kind of recognizing that with the technology we have and with this volume of production, we are also consuming a lot. And I think it's really it's important to not be complicit in our own fate, kind of realizing that, what, we're inheriting this, and we're, like Sofia was saying, she just finds herself, even though she experienced, she experienced a story where she was like, I don't want to be involved in this, period, at all. But then you kind of forget about it and you get involved in daily life in America and in the city, and that's just what it involves. You consume and you consume and you consume. And that not only just consuming on daily lifestyle things that have become absolutely inextricable from plastics, just, buying groceries, that's a necessity, right? But how come that automatically involves all of these things? But also the idea of green consumerism, and this is a topic we'll talk about in depth more later, but our generation, I feel like, has become so especially involved with this idea of sustainability that it has almost become a trend. So it's about buying those hydro flasks, multiple of them that, if you buy more than one hydro flask, it would have probably just been better to buy a couple plastic bottles at the end of the day, because the material inputs that are going into that one hydro flask immediately offset the inputs for one water bottle, right? So it's like, what does green consumerism mean? What are the things that I'm buying actually mean, and what is the result of me using them? So like I was saying, all of us feel this way. A lot of us feel this way, as according to these statistics, more than half of us feel like we're not doing enough. So how do we make sure that these things carry out into our daily life activities, and really learn how to reframe this instead of just have it be worry and let's buy more reusable bags and let's make sure we recycle this. It's a really difficult conversation that can be extremely overwhelming and daunting, which is kind of why we wanted to have this space, just to talk it through and see where this conversation is poking out into different aspects of our lives, and see, okay, where is the meaningful part of change that can come through? So yeah, it's not, I really just wanted to emphasize that this is not a conversation that is blaming the older generations and saying that we inherited all of this and we are the victims and there's nothing we can do at this point, because that would mean we're being complicit in the system as well. And we are consuming, as this generation, we are consuming a lot too, because when we came into this world, that was already the status quo. So we have no point of reference for how much we actually need, which is really interesting. I think I have not have a lived experience where I don't fill up a trash can, or my house doesn't fill up an entire trash can a day. That's always been the way it is. And so so we're also very involved in this system. So yeah, this is a conversation to also communicate with older generations and come to a healthy discussion point to meaningfully come together and find a productive way of viewing this, talking about this.
Yeah. I mean, there's one comment that's asking about future studies and like a change of education, right? And how we should teach this, I guess, how we should set up these structures. But then also, it's not just about like one system that exists. It's not just about like how we educate people, because there's enough information out there. Of these children, a lot of them are learning this either from their parents, from school, from their peers, online, since a lot of them like exist in that environment now. And where education is important, and I would say our fields, for example, environmentalism, architecture, maybe even like engineering as well. The biggest thing is really like the political and social changes that allow for these changes to be implemented. Like, how do you talk to a politician? Well, how do you even get into politics in the first place? A lot of us are starting to become that age where we can start entering Congress. We can start becoming local, advocates for the environment and move up through there. And the biggest thing is we need to take charge of the systems that we exist in. And like Mia said, not become a victim of it, but then actually become an aggregator of change, or somebody that like instills this new regime, right? That's based around sociology. I mean,
Yeah, no, I also think it's like, I think we're at the point where everything so far in our generation has been, how do we fix what we have right now? How do we keep it as it is as much as possible, but be sustainable? And I think we're all, and like we saw the whole campaign with the straws, like, and now every time I go get a giant, like if I go and I get a takeaway drink and it's in a giant plastic cup and there's a compostable plastic straw or a paper straw, that has been, like, that's the change that I'm seeing. And I think instead, we had a comment also on like, how do we influence the politicians? I think we need to show how we are willing to have a different paradigm, how we're willing to shift into a different paradigm, how we see that if we don't, Mia, yeah, like what you said before about we were born into this system where whoever gets the most presents at Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever, your birthday, like you win. And like I grew up in a pretty anti-consumerism household, but still like I value my success with how much money I make after college. And I know that is like a factor of the capitalistic system I grew up in. And I know like I have to fight against it. And it's really, really hard to fight against something that you don't really know is so invisible. And I think that is how, if we can convey that to politicians, that we are willing to not see so much growth every year. Like we won't reelect you if we see a ton of economic growth, because yeah, we're starting to realize that's all going into unnecessarily road development or the army and all of these things. And we don't really care about the GDP. We actually care about how our neighbors are doing, how the trees in our neighborhood are doing, how the trees in France are doing. Like we are living in a global world. And I think really the best way to influence politicians is tell them, how do you get reelected with this generation? And it's, again, we don't care that much about, at least I think when we look at the future and see what could be out there, if we keep growing and growing and growing, we really have to stop caring about that and start caring about other factors.
Yeah. It's, I think, really important to note that these things like straws and making sure you turn off the water when you do this, blah, 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 obviously are important and are representative of the importance of individual actions that lead up to a very meaningful collective action that does make a difference. But that is also part of this element that brings us anxiety, I think, because it's, oh, this is my individual action that is a part of this huge role of the disaster that is happening. It is my plastic straw that is leading to this absolute destruction. But I think, it's really important to always keep in mind that it is this fossil fuel narrative. It is, this is a system that it's the way it is. We have very, very powerful companies and it's kind of like this monopoly or oligopoly of these huge, huge, powerful players. And I think that if we were to really let that individual narrative consume us, it would, as Ben Milius, who is in the Columbia Earth Institute, he said this, and I'm kind of rephrasing his words, but if we let that narrative take over and we get very anxious and depressed as a result, then in a way we let the fossil fuel narrative win, because they benefit from us feeling all of this despair and ultimately like we can't make a difference, so there's no point. And that's a really scary part of this conversation among my friends and family that I've had, that, oh my God, so nothing I can do will even matter. So it's like, should we start leading these hedonistic lifestyles because we're all going to die in 50 years and there's no point, and recycling has no point, and all of these tangible things that we thought made a difference actually don't. And so that can be absolutely debilitating, right? And so but that is a perspective that maybe is put forward by those fossil fuel companies to say that, yeah, the blame is on you guys. not on us, even though we are the #1 most emitting industry in the world. It's on them, you know. So I think that's an absolute correct way to view this. It's kind of bringing that to the politicians or however we think we can make a change, and saying, you know, like we've already established that we're willing to do degrowth, whether that be in small actions in our daily lives. And I think that is what we do by recycling. That's how we actually think that. Many people actually believe that makes a difference. And that's kind of how they feel like they're doing their part. They think that they're playing their part by doing these things that we've been told that actually help. So I think we're willing to make those steps, but they don't actually make that big of a difference. So it's really always making sure to drive home that point, and always remembering that, you know, it's not us necessarily. We play a big part of it, and we are part of the demand for the fossil fuel companies. But let's always try to remember that it's on them, and we need to put pressure on them at all times, because not only is that how we would make a difference, but that's the direction we're moving in. We don't need to rely on fossil fuel anymore. And we're all thinking about other types of energy and other types of ways to do things, whether it be energy or in any other industry or school of thought or discipline. So it's always just remember that, to kind of, when you're feeling this despair and it's like, it's on me, it's on us, this is what we're doing, this is our impact, we're horrible for the planet. It's, I think, just kind of keeping that in mind a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, I Devon, do you want to talk a little bit about like how this isn't just us, this is a global issue? I know we've touched on that a little bit, but we do have we have a really great quote.
Yeah, you want to pull the quote up?
Yes.
Yeah.
So as Devon, go ahead if you want.
Yeah, no, I mean, the problem that we have when it comes to climate change, sadly, is one of the developing world putting more issues on, or actually having more issues put upon them by the developed world, where third world economies or developing nations, which haven't produced nearly as much carbon as even a city in America or in the US, pretty much, having to deal with most of the problems, the majority of the impacts from the climate change that we're seeing. And that could be somewhere in like here in the Philippines or somewhere abroad that has to deal with the ecological and environmental impact. And that could be something that isn't even flooding or drought or more severe hurricanes or typhoons. It could be something as simple as plastic waste getting into the waters and then causing fish to be polluted. It can be as simple as causing crop starvation because of the monocrop culture that we've developed globally, or just the waste that we see in the developed world that causes this overproduction of goods that then just go to waste when it could be used to feed the developing world. And because we still have this very nationalistic perspective on these problems as well, like for example, we're in New York right now, and New York has a huge impact, just like LA and all these other major cities and metropoli around the world. We have a huge impact on the direction things go. Where if every big city in the US, which tends to be more liberal and more environmental, were to just ban plastics outright, that would have a big effect on the plastic economy. But there still isn't a solution that can just come from banning things. It also takes this kind of understanding of what has already been done and how it affects people down the line, where we've already sent all of our trash to Asia, and it's already polluted the waters. So even once we step over this line of producing less emissions and actually taking carbon out of the air and actually reducing our carbon footprint year over year instead of increasing it globally, there's still going to be these aftershocks of the lives we led. And a big part of this is understanding that this is a global issue. This isn't just an American issue, a European issue, an African issue, an Asian issue. China's pollution, even if it's high now, is nowhere near what America's pollution is. And we can't just say, oh, well, now they're the bad guys, because this is our fight together. You can't just say because one person in your team is like not doing what you like them to do, that, it's just their fault and throw them under the bus when the whole team gets affected. And we need to kind of look at this as more of a universal relationship. It's a universal struggle. It's just as much one person's problem as it is another. And you can't just say, okay, well, then America is the bad guy, which you can. I mean, it's a pretty easy argument to make, but then that also causes this victimization, and knowing Americans will make them less likely to want to help other people. So it becomes this really interesting conversation where you have to realize, like, this is a globalist issue. And if anything, could be the thing that actually creates some kind of global political ecosystem and communication, because we have the technology for it. We have a way for people to really interact with each other.
Yeah, no, exactly. Before I started studying sustainable development, I studied global studies, which really intertwines a lot of the academics, at least at Columbia, and sustainable development always say there is no world government, but yet at the same time we're becoming. I think climate change has really made us a truly global society, because one country pollutes, the other one has the ramifications happen to them, even if they're not polluting. And I just remember, I'm sure a lot of us have seen those graphs of country, as you said, Devon, like there are countries that pollute this much, and then there are countries that pollute this much, and we all are having the same side effects of that pollution. And I think we've talked a lot about the problem and about our feelings and despair. And I think we should go into what we, as three young people who are still students, we don't have any big claims to our name, but what we think we can do and the world can do to make this better, and also just to make it easier to go through day-to-day life with this weight on our shoulders. I think we've all touched upon, like, the feeling of, before coming together as a group, having a really difficult time, like, engaging with our peers about this topic, or not wanting to spend the pregame before going out talking about this stuff and ending up happening, and just the need for an outlet to come together. And I think in the last 10 or so minutes that we have here, I would love to hear from all of us, like, what we think we can, what this space is, and what we think we can do to make this better.
Obviously this is, like I said, such a massive space to think about, so many things to think about, and it's kind of like debilitating at times. But I think, we can only really start with the smaller things, and just kind of, I encourage everyone, especially young people, to really think critically about the things that we don't think about. And I know that's hard, because how do you learn to identify things that are very normal to us, but kind of realize that that's not the way it has to be. Just kind of learning to look around us every day and identify and be critical about some of those things. And also to older generations, just to listen to the youth, even if you didn't, directly, start a crazy fossil fuel company, but just kind of make space and think about the space that you're taking, and recognize who will be making important decisions and who will be suffering the consequences in the future, and who will need to survive through the disasters that are going to keep happening, probably at even worse scales. So who are the people that are actually going to need to survive through these disasters, and how can we make space for them? And just, humans are really capable of many things. it doesn't have to be this way. And I know it's so much easier said than done. Like, we can always talk about things in abstractified terms, but just kind of starting off with that attitude of, we can rewrite the social contract. It doesn't have to be this way. And in fact, because we're entering such an unprecedented phase of Earth and life, like, we're going to have to change. So that might even facilitate a new way of doing things. So I think just having that faith that there's no possibility of going on the way it has been. So let's take this as an opportunity to reassert ourselves and say, this is what needs to happen, and I have that lived experience, and so let's do this, and kind of just speak louder. I know, as I just had my first internship at like a real job, and I was the youngest person there, obviously, and as the youngest person there, I was like kind of finding myself keeping quiet sometimes, or just being shy. And I'm not saying necessarily in this context would I do this. I was an intern at work, but like when talking about important issues, to not feel like an imposter, because at the end of the day, our opinion matters so much. And I think older generations are absolutely starting to recognize that. Remember, with Bernie Sanders and AOC and the Sunrise Movement, it's the youth generation that really spearheaded that Sunrise Movement. And just the acknowledgement also with Greta Thunberg, just people realizing that these people, their opinion matters. And to name another, Naomi Osaka, just kind of saying, hey, my mental health matters, when she withdrew from a super prestigious tennis tournament and said, no, I don't want to work. This is ridiculous. I'm overworked. I don't need to do this. And just kind of as an act of defiance, but also just to prioritize her own needs. So people will listen, and it's scary sometimes to speak louder and more frequently when we kind of feel like, we're not the ones with authority, but just to have faith that people will listen, because I really think they will.
Yeah. And there's a comment that I think is kind of an interesting segue into what I was thinking, which is like President Biden said that we'll see 50 years of development in the next 10 years. Now, whether that's true or not, the most interesting thing that I think about this is we're clearly seeing a economic crisis where our economy is moving in an existentially different direction than our society is. So our technology is providing new things and new ways for us to consume and exist in the world and buy things in the world without our society keeping track with that. So we're in this circumstance where we're producing all this, we have this ability to communicate all the time, we're being fed information all the time. But then when it comes to our mental health, when it comes to our economic impact, our environmental impact, how we exist and our labor, like how we are monetized from our labor, it seems like everything is almost more regressive, or we're very ignorant to what it's like to be a human being in the same regard. And we're at this, I don't know, this weird turning point where we have this existential fight between how we used to exist as human beings and how we can exist in this new millennia and this new century. Because we didn't just go from the 20th century to the 21st. We went from the 1000 to 2000 millennia to the 2000 to 3000 millennia. We have 1,000 years to kind of shift how we behave and exist in this new reality. And everything can kind of lead towards that. But then we also have this huge environmental struggle at the beginning, which is really showing the problems that humans can really not just create for themselves, but the world that we inhabit, the other creatures that inhabit it with us. And it causes a lot of questions, and there's a lot more nuance in everything that we're saying. Like, these are all very like macro concepts, which we'd like to get into, I think. But yeah, it's not all bad necessarily. Like, it's causing people to come together. It's causing like this one issue that people can really centralize themselves around and really talk about. It's like allowing for a younger generation to not have to send themselves to war and possibly die in conflict against their brethren or like their human peers, but to still kind of have something to rally themselves against and like feel a sense of unity. And I think that's kind of like the most optimistic way that you could take this, which is like after we've gone through this, our generation and the resounding generations might be better for it, might be more unified. We just need to make sure we make the right decisions, we have the right action, we take the right steps to create that better world, which will allow us to keep all this progress into the future.
Yeah, and just in our last 5 minutes, Joanne just had a comment about how can we engage and activate in our community. And I think that's why we wanted to do this talk and why we wanted to make it into a series, and where the three of us can kind of be a voice for younger generations and have on other voices from our generation, and maybe even the younger students come on as well, because I think it is something. I think it's pretty invisible. I think a lot of people don't. There's not a community group in every town where people are coming together and sitting and talking about this, but really there should be, because I think honestly, just engaging ask people who are younger than you, how do you feel about this? What do you think we should do? I think that's the way to start. And I think as people who know their lives are going to be in this state of climate change, true change, for the majority of their life, as we become older and work our way up into positions of power, things will change. But in the time being, just listen and come to talks like this and join talks like this. We will make sure our emails are shared. And so if you have an urge to come on and speak with us for one of these upcoming topics, as you can see, these are 6 of our upcoming topics. Hopefully we will have more. But
yeah, this was just kind of setting the stage and really creating that sphere of discussion. And Joanne, to your point as well, like obviously I think we've done a lot of growing in the past year, but I think for me, what I've recognized as like a sign of growth is no pun intended growth, but like personal growth has been just being open enough to talk to people who aren't from the same age group as me. I've been having a lot of more spontaneous interactions on the street in New York, where I talk to people. Like the other day I was talking to an older Jewish man who was telling me about the holiday. And he was just telling me about everything that they're doing. And I just was immediately opened up into this new conversation, this new line of thought that I never would have before. So it's really about just bridging that gap. And I know that sounds pretty broad and generic, but I think it is a really important starting point. And especially now, because I think a lot of us don't realize that we're all thinking about the same things, maybe from a different approach, but that's even more important to come together and address, because we have different areas that root from different places, but we all want the same things. This is just kind of an introduction, and we want to bring other people onto this show. And so if there's anyone who has something to say and really wants to get involved or wants to talk, like, please reach out to us. And here are some of the future topics, like Sofia was saying, that we want to discuss. And we just want this to be a really interactive and engaging place. We want it to be discussion-based and casual. So it's just, people voicing how they feel, and that it's kind of like a low stakes environment type of thing, where we can just really have this cathartic experience and explain how we feel and connect to other people. So I think we really want to touch on degrowth, for example, and like green consumers. And we did touch on these things already, but we really just grazed on them today. There's so much more we can get into. And we, at first we were kind of overwhelmed with the volume of things there are to address. So that's kind of why we made this a series to begin with, so we can really take our time and go through how we feel about each one of these things. It is 11:59. And Andy, is there anything you want to say or wrap up with?
I'll pop in just to say it's a thrill to see an episode of the show. Really capture the goals I've had with these friendly takeovers, and I'd love this to become a regular thing here. Excited about the idea. It might lead to a podcast, audio as well for those who just don't have time to watch the stuff. And you're all just spectacularly demonstrating the potential that exists in the new generation on this planet, taking anxiety, just designing paths from anxiety to action to impact. And so keep it up. That's all I'll say. I've been spreading the word as much as I can on social media, and I'll continue to help do that as we go forward. So thank you all for doing what you did today. This is the Columbia University Climate School and Earth Institute broadcast, Sustain What broadcast. These have been going on since March of 2020. I think this is about 230 of them so far. And the more that this can ramify and spread, the better. So I'll just take it out that way and throw it back to you guys just to say a last goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for providing this space and platform for us to talk. I think it's going to be a meaningful experience, and I can't wait for more.
Yeah, thank you all so much for watching and engaging, and I can't wait to hear more voices. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone. Yeah, I think because of COVID, everybody's become very knowledgeable on what's happening. And like these conversations are very important, no matter who it is. Like if you're interested in saying something, say it. Like find a peer. And that's all like we can hope for, right? More voices, more action.
Great. And that's a wrap.
Thank you.